This event is presented by the Lloyd D. Levenson Institute of Gaming, Hospitality and Tourism, Stockton University's School of Business, in partnership with the Greater Atlantic City Chamber of Commerce and the Cannabis and Hemp Research Initiative at Stockton.
Okay, here we go. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Destination Cannabis, Opportunities for New Jersey Hospitality and Tourism. I'm Jane Buchanevich, the Faculty Director of the Lloyd D. Levenson Institute of Gaming, Hospitality and Tourism, also known as LIGHT, in the School of Business at Stockton University. Today's event is being offered in partnership with the Greater Atlantic City Chamber of Commerce and the Cannabis and Hemp Research Institute at Stockton University. It's also being simulcast by Pro Cannabis Media. Events like this are a testament to LIGHT's mission and role in the regional business community as a forum for public discussion and discovery. Development of a recreational cannabis industry in New Jersey will have significant impacts on the state's existing businesses and will create new and unique opportunities for hospitality and tourism businesses especially. Today, we're joined by a panel of experts in the cannabis industry who will provide valuable insight grounded in the experience of other states in operationalizing a regional cannabis marketplace. We have a few set questions for our guests, and we hope to take a few questions at the end from the audience. Please use your Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen to submit your questions. Also, now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Jenna Masaccio, a 2021 graduate of Stockton Hospitality, Tourism, and Event Management Studies program, as well as the Cannabis Studies program, and an early career professional in the field. She has moderated panels for Cannademics and SMART and continues to work with several cannabis-focused organizations. Jenna, go right ahead.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. I'll be moderating. I recently graduated from Stockton this past May, and I'm very excited to be doing this panel on cannabis tourism. I'd like to kick it off with everybody introducing themselves. Rob, if you'd like to start for us.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Rob Mejia. I am an adjunct professor in the Cannabis Studies Department at Stockton, where we actually offer a minor in cannabis studies. I'm also an author. I wrote the Essential Cannabis book, the Essential Cannabis Journal, and I write a bi-monthly column for NJ Canna Insider called Professor Mejia's Weed Corner. I also do host a number of edibles events, and at one point I launched a line of infused condiments. Thank you.
Jamie, you want to kick us off next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jamie Hoffman. I am located in Seattle, Washington. We are a I-502 cannabis processor. I'm the president and founder of our company. We are one of the #1 edibles in the state. We have 3 main brands that we've launched. We have a very successful gummy called Pioneer Squares. We have potato chips, and we have chocolate syrups. Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Great, Brian.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to Stockton University and their partners for bringing this discussion together. My name is Brian Applegarth. I'm based in California. I founded the Cannabis Travel Association International in 2017, and we're the United Voice of Cannabis Travel. I'm also Chief Strategy Officer of Cultivar Brands, which is a strategic marketing and events agency based in California. Some of our work was partnering with MMGY Travel Intelligence and facilitating a national survey study on the cannabis motivated travel audience, how they self-identify, what are their habits, what's the motivating factors for how they pick where they visit and what they want to do when it relates to cannabis and hemp. A lot of really interesting insights. Have also worked with hotels and currently work with multiple destinations and DMOs in California on cannabis and hemp travel strategy. So it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Susan.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here today, and thank you Stockton University for hosting this event. It's a very exciting topic, if I do say so myself. I am a social sciences and humanities research postdoctoral fellow in Canada, Ontario, Canada, actually. And I study cannabis tourism. For the past 2 years, I've been studying how legalization at the federal level has impacted cannabis tourism in Canada. And so that is also including farm gate and now different forms of cannabis agritourism as well, which I know that the US is very advanced in. So I'm here to hopefully contribute to the conversation, and I'm very excited to chat with everyone.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to kick it off with us talking about, everybody is from a different area. I know, Jamie, you're in Seattle. Brian, you're in California. Susan, you're in Canada. Me and Rob are in Jersey. Can you guys all talk about, the regulatory environment that you guys are all, since you're all in, completely different areas? And if you're familiar with, what regulations have been released in Jersey in terms of cannabis, how could you relate that, if you can?
Who would you like to start?
Susan, I would definitely love to hear about the regulatory environment. And I know you just mentioned farm gate, so I thought this would be a nice little intersection for you to talk about some of that research you've been doing.
Sure, thank you. I'm happy to start. So the regulations in Canada are very heavily focused on the production end of the commodity chain, as well as the distribution as well, so meaning retail. Although there are things to be worked out, at least there are regulations in those areas. One of the biggest problems that we're facing, and this is actually something that maybe New Jersey has up on us right now, and other places in the US as well, is there's a lack of regulation around consumption. It's great that consumers, both citizens and tourists alike, can come to Canada. They can purchase up to 30 grams of cannabis. Awesome. But there are very few places to consume it in its variety of forms. And so the argument that I make in my research is that this is not necessarily a socially responsible thing, because having spaces of consumption increases the reduction of risk, because these spaces are safe, people can come and consume, it's relatively supervised in an indirect way. And they're also safe in terms of being places of not being judged. So that's important as well to incorporate into the definition. So that's one of the things that I know that is lacking in Canada. And when I say consumption, not only the spaces of consumption, but also for restaurants being able to serve infused foods and beverages as well. That is regulation that the industry is pushing for, and I know that action is being taken. And so when I say that New Jersey kind of has one up on us, is that I believe that the regulation states that consumption lounges are allowed in New Jersey if a retail store is either attached to it or on the premises. I don't know if maybe someone else could speak better to that. Maybe Rob, I don't know, you could maybe speak better to that regulation. So I think that is really going to provide leverage for businesses to harness for tourism purposes.
Yeah, you're totally right, Susan, that that is the way that it goes. If you do own a dispensary, you can, if your township allows. And that is a big hurdle for a lot of people. We have 565 townships here, and only 9 of them have opted into consumption lounges. So we have a ways to go. And we're actually in a very exciting point in New Jersey now, because we are moving towards adult use, but that market has not opened up yet. We expect it to open up shortly. So right now we have a lot of people who are preparing for all the opportunities that will come in hospitality and tourism and beyond. So we have a lot of people who are setting up what they're going to be doing pretty soon. And the landscape in New Jersey will be interesting, because yes, we have consumption lounges. There will be some opportunities probably for some infused meals, although right now that is limited just to CBD at the moment. We also don't really have an edibles program. So I would say really that keep an eye on New Jersey, because we're going to go from 0 to 60 in this next year.
That's how I felt today. Yeah, versus you know, Brian, you're in California, which is, you know, a much more mature market. How has it been with, you know, getting everything going? I know that, you know, you started with the California Tourism Association and now it's an international thing you got going on. How has that been dealing with other states' regulations and expanding?
Yeah, so from a regulatory perspective for the cannabis industry, it's highly regulated in California. It's extremely complex. It's an interesting dynamic because prior to legalization, California at one point was estimated providing about 80 to 90% of the cannabis throughout the US and beyond on the traditional market. So there's a very sophisticated, well established traditional market so there's this interesting dynamic in California where the above board compliant legal cannabis and consumption lounges of today are competing with this very robust traditional market in the state. And when you layer on the tax burdens, it's a really interesting landscape that's very challenged in a lot of ways. But from a regulatory perspective, you know, we have retailers up and down the state of California. You see markets like Humboldt and Mendocino really leading in a way of kind of a place of source, like an origin market that has all those bells and whistles of agriculture and craft and terroir. And the cannabis appellations have been being worked on for years now with the CDFA and a handful of stakeholders throughout the state. But really that kind of Northern California place of source. There are other legacy regions as well that are dotted throughout California where there's these amazing roots. And really when you think of it through a tourism perspective, you have the storytelling and the craft, right, of this kind of terroir driven flower, all the alchemy around the products that are really mindfully created and locally done with local inputs, regenerative cultivation methods, and then of course all the stories about the hippies and the beatniks and the back to the land movement and all these amazing California stories that are part of this cannabis story. And then you have these consumption lounges like really opening up. So, you know, you have San Francisco, Greater Palm Springs region in the desert, you have West Hollywood, as well as Mendocino and Humboldt are really leading the way when it comes to these places to gather and consume. The first kind of wave of consumption lounges we saw was really just bolted onto a retail shop. So it was kind of buy your products, go sit in here and smoke a joint or have a beverage or, you know, put some infused olive oil that's single sourced, you know, over something and eat it. So what's exciting about cannabis is the flexibility of the products that it can create, right, and collaboration and all the ways that that's going to expand beyond. We're starting to see more sophisticated models now with stages and programming and arcades and pool tables and facilitating really interesting educational talks for Canna Curious, all the way up to programming and kind of flights of flower tasting for the connoisseurs. And in the cannabis landscape, you're really looking at it today with the Canna Curious audience, the cannabis wellness traveler, as well as the cannabis enthusiast traveler. And that's not even mentioning the medical travel and the business travel that this area attracts because the brain trust is really strong. But going back to this regulatory landscape, you know, we spend a lot of time educating about what is possible, right? So when it comes to cannabis to hemp, what is possible, while acknowledging that the regulatory framework can be burdensome. One really exciting evolution that's happened this year is there's been an assembly bill introduced. This was part of the work of the Cannabis Travel Association. It's AB 2844, and it's actually a cannabis catering license. So it's something that really speaks to hospitality, weddings, conferences, events. And I'm excited about this, and it has a lot of great support out of the gate here, that it will really speak to this kind of catering and be something that the hospitality and travel industry look at as something familiar and compliant that shows them what are the guardrails, what do I have to do to be legal and compliant. So that's the latest and greatest info out of California when it comes to kind of that regulatory approach. Of course, you have the events as well, like not to pile on, but you have the Appalachians that are going to be rolling out next year. And then you have the cannabis events, the Emerald Cup, High Times, and now the California State Fair is incorporating cannabis into the awards program and on site.
Yeah, that should be very exciting. Is that this year that this is going to happen?
It is, yeah. It's got 10 categories. It's celebrating the live plant, like what the grape is to wine. We're celebrating we're staying very close to the live plant in the ground. So we're going to be celebrating 7 terpene categories of abundance, also 3 acidic cannabinoids, THCA, CBDA, and CBGA, and we're having a co-dominant terpene category. So we can really educate around this very important principle, which is the entourage and ensemble effect, and the importance of that, right? So, so we're very excited. The on-site expression is going to be all educational. It's not going to have consumption or retail, but it's going to be an amazing expression on-site for 17 days with a mainstream California State Fair audience, and it's really a historic moment. So we're seeing movement here. It's exciting.
Can I jump in, Jenna, and just make a quick comparison? It was recently announced, actually, that there's going to be a Cannabis Expo conference at the Western State. It's the Western Status, what is it? No, the Western Fair Association, pardon me, the Western Fair Association in London, Ontario. So
wow.
the Western Fair is agriculture. That's an agricultural association. That's an agricultural fair that has been hosted annually for the past 50 years until COVID. And so as a way to regenerate, right, get things back going, they're starting to partner with the cannabis industry. So I just wanted to jump in and say that is a comparison there that is on point for Canada and the US.
That is very cool. Jamie, is there anything you want to add on regulations in Washington or regulations?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So the regulations in Washington, it's interesting here. So we have the state, and this is probably pretty typical for most of the states that have medical or recreational. So you have the state, and then you also have to worry about the city, and then in some cases you have to worry about the county. So if you're wanting to really understand and drill down to whether you're going to be getting into this business and where your facility is going to be, you have to understand that there's regulations you have to follow for that level, whether it's being overseen by the state, that city you're in, and then also in the county. So it can be very different. In our particular case, we have agencies and inspections for 2 of them, for the city and the state. Following them is just like following a set of rules. So for example, you hear people talking about regulatory a lot. It sounds very complicated. If you're not an attorney, how do I manage it? Well, it can be kind of simple. And we have 40 employees here, and this is a lesson that people will get immediately. As they're working here, and every day we're always talking about being compliant, and we're always talking about being compliant with what the regulations are. It will start with, we do our own extractions in-house. So once we do our own extractions in-house, the oils have to be tested by a lab. The lab has to be certified by the state. And that whole process from making the oil, how we're making the oil, how we're tracing the oil, how we're labeling the oil that's being stored in our inventory, how we're getting that oil to the lab, all that has to be traced. And we have to make sure that, how do we distinguish one oil from another oil? And how are we going to infuse that? How do we understand what is the amount of THC or cannabinoids in that chunk of oil, that kilo of oil that we just extracted? So we're going to trace all that, and we're going to manage all that. And all those are the regulations that we're overseeing. And then we'll take that oil and we're going to infuse it into an edible. And again, we're following very strict regulations. We have to make sure that those candies are compliant without going over. And in most particular cases, if it's going to be a 10 milligram candy, we have to get it tested and send samples to the lab before we can even sell it. And then we can package it and get it to the stores. And again, there's regulations that have to do with getting our product from inventory into the stores. So we're creating labels, we're creating manifests, so you could trace from the flower to the oil to the edible to the store the whole way. And that's kind of the circle of the regulations that we have to deal with, and making sure along the way that as long as we're tracing and tracking everything, we're going to be compliant. And for an edible business like us, is we set up processes with our employees to make sure that you can walk into any of our facilities at any time and you'll know what batch that is of candy, what oil is being used to infuse something going on in the kitchen, so that you understand what's going in our lab, in our candy area, in our packaging area at any point in time. So we're just really following those rules and making sure we're doing business and we're staying compliant. And it's not like we're just making candy and throwing oil in it. It's very strict, and we follow those rules. And once you have a process in place, you can manage it going forward. And I think that's really just making sure you're training your staff and making sure you follow these processes. So that's how we handle the regulations and the regulatory currently. Now, obviously, there's going to be changes in regulations, and that's going to happen all the time. That's not unique to our industry. That's what happens in many manufacturing and many other industries. So we just go with it and roll with it. And when there's a change that happens, which there happens to be a new change happening in Washington currently, we're going to adjust our processes and go forward, train the employees, and make sure everybody knows how to roll out that new change.
Yeah, absolutely. The ability to adapt in this industry is so important. I see we have a Q&A question. I know this was asked to Brian, but it's also for Susan. Other than the cannabis dispensary, what other co-located assets like hotels, wineries contribute to successful cannabis industry in Canada or California? Either of you guys want to jump in on that first?
Susan, you want to go first?
Oh, okay. I was going to say, Brian, you go right ahead. Look how polite we are. Okay. Well, sorry. Yeah. Partnerships are definitely going to be key in the success of cannabis tourism. So yes, dispensaries are great. That's where tourists can access the cannabis. But what is that paired with? The tourism part comes in, I suppose, with respect to the experience around it. And I think the United States offers more examples, perhaps, for combining cannabis with different sectors of the tourism industry, like hotels, like the tours, going on farm tours. How great would that be? Which mimics, or mirrors, I should say, how the wine tourism industry works with respect to having wine tours. The one thing I didn't talk about, which you did ask me about, Jenna, at the beginning, was about farm gate. And I think that this is one thing that Canada has over the US. So to put it the other way around, now farm gate is, it's actually a retail model that enables the grower, the licensed producer, as we call them in Canada, to actually sell their product at the facility, the place in which it was grown. So we could go into a production facility and produce the cannabis that was produced, right, grown at that site. And so this is one of the characteristics that we see as part of wine tourism, where as a tourist, you get to go on a tour, you see where the grapes are grown, there's an agricultural element. Brian, you talked about the terroir and the appellations element. I think that's going to be key for promoting cannabis tourism, and California is already light years ahead on that. You just have to integrate the farm gate component, right?
Yeah.
So that, right? So people can go on the farm tours. They want to go on the farm tours. They want to buy the cannabis, and they want to consume the cannabis on the farm where they bought it, and hang out with people, have a social experience, right? And have that space where they can connect with others, and that's very much part of the experience as well. Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you. Maybe
Sure.
you can fill in the blanks there.
Sure, and totally. So just to your point, California's behind on this part. Where like the farm gate, Canada's ahead. It's because they allow that direct to consumer experience of meeting the winemaker, right? Or meeting the cannabis cultivator, and all the love and passion and effort that goes into creating the bespoke kind of cultivars that represent that terroir and that craft, right? So we're excited to evolve there as soon as possible. So I wrote down a few things here, and one of those, a first consideration here is stigma, right? Like when I think of cannabis travel, I almost equate it to when LGBTQ travel started surfacing up and had to have their safe travel book in the 1970s. This also existed for the African American community with the Green Book. So cannabis kind of is in that same step where there's still a lot of stigma that needs to be combated. That being said, in certain markets like California and other adult use markets that have moved forward, you're starting to see more and more strategic partners emerge and raise their hands from the travel, I would say, stakeholder economy or ecosystem, which includes airports, hotels, attractions, restaurants, art exhibits, right? And cannabis is an amazing tool to kind of weave together and have special strategic partnerships and strategies here. So the way that works is, there's a method that I speak of often called the effect pairing method. And it's essentially as wine pairs with food, cannabis pairs with environments or activities and experiences. And what the science is showing is that specific cultivars are actually kind of targeted sensory enhancement precursors to the set and setting or the environment that you're walking into. Some of them are inspiring and great with art. Some of them are appetite stimulating and great with a Michelin star meal. So really looking at what are these experiences that you can position and partner with in a smart way that are cannabis friendly and that want this audience, are willing to accept this audience, and that understand that there's many other methods of ingestion above and beyond inhalation these days. Just that basic education is key. If you're in a market where it's still kind of early on, education and data is paramount. Like just getting strictly the education and data behind this from the audience, what their median household income is, what motivates their travel, and vice versa. You got to start educating the cannabis assets in your destination, and find the ones that have an appetite to have a very well-connected travel strategy and that understand the value of being able to feel the customer experience that's on brand for the destination marketing organization, and understands that there's brand pillars and visitor experiences and media and influencers that come in and report on an experience in a destination. So being that connective tissue of assembling those ecosystems and finding a way to wrap your arms around all the cannabis travel assets and be a resource, as well as drill down on who are these partners and how do you nurture the communication so you can develop cannabis experience products that are very marketable and promotable, that welcome in the Canna Curious. And I want to make sure we remember that this isn't always about consumption. This is travel. There's immersive cultural experiences. It's like somebody going to on a wine tour that doesn't drink alcohol. And cannabis has that just layers and layers of story and that are interesting and very diverse. And we also can't forget, because it's always compared to wine, we can't forget that cannabis was also deemed essential. And when they were creating the cannabis appellations of California, they looked just as closely at Manuka honey out of New Zealand and its health benefits and what that means as an appellation. Because this is something that spans that spectrum from medical to wellness to adult use. And we can never lose sight of that, right? Because that's a really This plan is extremely complex. So come with data, come with education, and that's going to make everybody, it's going to bring the conversation current, and then figuring out who your allies are in the first phase of the normalized ecosystem, which should include hotels, restaurants, culture and art, as well as retailers, lounges, and infused dining experiences.
Great. I definitely want to shift the conversation a little bit over towards food and beverage. I did see that we had a question for Rob. Can you explain on the cannabis-related business opportunities you see created in the year for those? And they also want to know a little bit more about the 9 townships that approved consumption. I know that I personally wanted to talk to you about setting the basics of a business in food and beverage for cannabis and cannabis as an ingredient, but let's kick it off with business opportunities in New Jersey for the upcoming year of hospitality.
Sure. And I think one thing that we've all been talking about here, a little bit on the fringes, is that a lot of cannabis hospitality and tourism is entrepreneurship. And I also particularly like this area in part because it's somewhat easier and less expensive to get into than some of the other parts of the cannabis business. So I'll give a couple quick examples. So one would be that you do have a big education component. So you could actually set up a company that has a lot of partnerships and does things like pick up the Canna Curious at the airport. So you pick them up in a transport vehicle. You educate them on what you can and cannot do in New Jersey. You take them to a dispensary where they can get their products. Hopefully they can at that point go to a consumption lounge. And to that point, I did hear that Scotch Plains was the 9th township to allow for consumption lounges. The other 2 I know off the top of my head are Atlantic City, because I'm on their cannabis advisory committee, and then also Trenton. And I know there's 6 more in addition to that. But at any rate, you can do things like you can also set up tours. So you take people to a cultivation center. People love to see the plant grow. I mean, just to show them the leaf, just to smell the different things, just to touch it, see what kind of plant it is. Pretty amazing. You can do that. You can take them to a processing facility. You can let them see edibles being made. You can go further and take them to events where you can offer food and beverage that's infused. When I talked to a professional chef, what he said was he likes to think of cannabis as kind of having 5 new ingredients because they do have such different taste to them. And you compare them with different meals and you can do the different flights, that it is like, it's only limited by your creativity as to how you can incorporate it into food. So I think and teaching people how to sort of look for the different terpenes that contribute to the effect. Those are the real smell of the flower. And I mean, people always love that. Sometimes I will see meals started with dipping oils, and they're particularly dipping oils that are pretty pungent, but they kind of teach people as to what a terpene in cannabis smells and tastes like. So I think that part is pretty cool as well. And we are seeing a bunch of innovation in the edibles market as well. So we're seeing fast acting edibles, and that means those are edibles that take effect in 20 minutes or less. And I do believe those are going to become the standard in the beverage market because it echoes kind of what happens in the alcohol market a little more closely. But then I think also in the food market, that if something takes effect that much quicker, it gives a more predictable response. You don't have people making the big mistake of taking too much up front or not being patient enough, and so they'll take a second dose and then not have a particularly good experience. So I do think that sort of teaching people how to handle and enjoy edibles and then having quick acting edibles will all probably contribute to a much better experience. But again, in New Jersey right now, our quote edibles program is limited to 3 products: syrups, which are basically like tinctures, lozenges, which look like bigger Altoids, and then also we do have some pretty plain gummies, but that's it. But we don't have any baked goods or anything like that. And across the nation, you'll find that the data says that gummies are king. Gummies are still number 1, chocolate is second, and then you have a lot of stuff in that 3rd tier, whether it's some of the baked goods like cookies, whether it's the oils, chips. I mean, you think about it, it's all there, and there could be a lot of other creative things that can happen. So if I'm in New Jersey now, I would give some thought as to what you can do as an entrepreneur that you're already doing. If you're a yoga instructor, can you add a couple sessions of yoga and cannabis? If you're a paint instructor, how about do a puff paint? What about if you do an event that you can teach people how to roll a joint and roll sushi? What about sports? They have 420 events in Colorado. So really, I think you should think about what you're good at. Oh, and there's a backlog in weddings, by the way, right now too. So if you are if you make bouquets, why not put some cannabis leaves in there and other little buds and things like that? I mean, you could really have some fun with it. So what I would say is give some thought as to what you're passionate about, what you're good at, and see if you can kind of pivot into the cannabis industry or make some partnerships and become a resource for people who want to really enjoy what cannabis hospitality and tourism has to offer.
Yeah, you see, you hit off all, well, almost all four sectors. You got three of them. You got transportation, you got events, you got, what was the other one? You didn't get lodging. That's what I know that you missed out on. You got food and beverage, transportation, and events. You didn't get lodging in the.
True. I'll let somebody else handle lodging.
But in terms of cannabis, right now it's considered a supplement, correct? So we don't look at it as like a food ingredient.
Is that question directed to me? You were kind of breaking up a little bit. Okay. So yeah, there's a couple things. I mean,
is that correct?
For the ease of answer, yes. I mean, each state has their own regulations. Right now in New Jersey, we can infuse with CBD only. At some point, we will get some guidance on what we can do on the THC front, but it really is your state. Your state is your country, and you just have to follow whatever it is that your state tells you that you have to do as far as things like dosing, infusion, what kind of licenses are available. So that's kind of the easy answer. But all of us do expect that at some point we will have national legalization, and there will be more standard rules that will come about. And that's when it's really going to get interesting, because then we'll have states that can ship their products across state lines, and that is going to open up all kinds of opportunities. I can't even imagine what that's going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. This is also open to everybody. How do you think cannabis and hemp will lead the next era of hospitality and tourism? I know we've kind of talked about certain ways that we expect it to go in New Jersey, but we could long shoot for federally or just within your own state. How do you think it will portray, go on in the next year or two?
I'll jump in on that. So, I think sustainability, it's going to elevate sustainability is already a very important trend in the travel industry. And hemp has an opportunity to really elevate that conversation, as well as the implementation of that with all kinds of products, methods. This goes in all kinds of forms through hotels, airports, etc. And this is, these are ancillary products, right? It could come down to the uniforms your staff wears, as simple as that, or trying to replace plastics with single-use hemp-based packaging. So just hemp in general, as the technology advances, it's a really exciting opportunity. The term regeneration, I believe, is going to be the next frontier beyond sustainability. So it's all about the regenerative full loop model of smart practices, and it's going to be built on the method of cultivation is kind of a nice platform and jump off point, but I believe it's going to further that discussion around of sustainability into regeneration and what are regenerative methods. I also believe that hemp and cannabis are going to really steward that's going to widen the definition of wellness. And I think it's going to really, true to the plant itself, which its core principles, for those who don't know, is helping your body work toward what we call homeostasis or optimal balance. So if you have anything that has gone a bit off or awry in your body, in any of your systems, your skeletal system, your reproductive system, et cetera, the cannabis plant on a biological level works to recalibrate and bring you back into homeostasis or back into balance. And the fact that cannabis works in that way and hemp work in that way, I believe is going to widen the discussion of wellness, and it's going to bring more into that physical, but also the mental and the spiritual health. And I think it's going to open these discussions up as kind of we evolve. And another topic that I think hasn't been touched on that's important is the intersection of cannabis and spa. You know, you have these topical
Yeah.
applications and massages and treatments, and that is an innovative frontier. So it almost, for the person who is less familiar with cannabis and hemp, it's almost too good to be true, or so many applications. But all of these are real. So to Rob's point, as you drill down on what your area of expertise is, like, make some time to do some research around hemp seeds and nutrition. It's amazing what you'll discover, right? Or XYZ, if you're a spa expert, start digging into CBD, yes, but go into CBG and all these other cannabinoids. There's over 400 to 500 compounds in cannabis, and it's an incredibly evolved and complex plant. And there's new frontier here for whatever you're passionate about. So those are some of the the next era of travel that I believe that cannabis and hemp will help be a part of.
And Brian, you're so correct that it's expanding the conversation already, so that we are seeing much more talk about psychedelics. I mean, you're seeing a lot of discussion about microdosing and mushrooms, psilocybin, for example, and big research projects at Johns Hopkins, et cetera. And I don't doubt at some point if Jamie's company might be making something with some mushrooms for wellness.
We don't have any plans in the future to do anything with mushrooms right now. I think our THC is psychoactive enough, but I do want to say that, you know, if anyone is interested in getting into an entrepreneurship and getting into this industry, you know, it's always a mission of mine that I really do believe that having the privilege of having a cannabis license is very, you know, it's an awesome privilege to have that, and to be innovative with that license and make something new, bring to the industry, you know, make a new candy, think of something innovative. Just don't take something that somebody else created and made and add cannabis to it or add hemp to it. I think that's boring. And it just isn't, it's just copycatting, you know. Be an inventor. I mean, people have labs and you can create something, create something and give somebody a reason to have to spend $35 on a little jar of something or on a bag of candy. I think it's very, very important that, you know, just don't copy what somebody else did. You know, be an entrepreneur. That's really what we believe in. Plus, I also want to mention that we are one of the only edible companies that is kosher certified. So that's another niche that we have, is our edibles are kosher. We have a rabbi actually come to our facility and inspect our kitchens and make sure that all of our ingredients are kosher, and it's very clean. So we're gluten-free, non-GMO, kosher certified. So there's a lot of ways that you can create your own niche in a market that is barely tapped.
Yeah, that is very unique. I don't know anybody else doing kosher edibles and, you know, going through the process of getting it, you know, certified and everything with the rabbi. So that is insanely cool. I just want to check our Q&A real quick. I saw we had a couple more questions. How does New Jersey plan to involve the FDA and local food regulators into the cannabis hospitality? That's a little bit of a tough one. Do you have any thoughts on that, Rob?
Well, I mean, what will happen is that it'll be the other way around. The FDA will insert itself into New Jersey market. That's what will happen. It's not like I mean, I think a lot of people are looking for more regulation on the CBD and the hemp side. I'll give you a quick example. So especially if people are using hemp, which is federally legal in the US, you can ship across state lines. And there are some edibles producers that will look for the cheapest hemp available because they want to infuse with that oil. But sometimes that hemp is not tested. Sometimes that hemp can be tainted. So that's an example of where I actually would welcome some regulation and make sure that hemp was tested just like cannabis was tested. And then also just on the CBD side, if you look at any of the studies, if you did a test and you tested 50 samples of CBD, you're going to find that over half of them typically do not have the potency that they say they do. They don't have some of the terpenes and other things that are supposed to be in there. So I do think that needs to be regulated too, because you do need to know what kind of product you're getting. And especially for medical patients or for health and wellness issues, you definitely need to know what's in your product. So I would say that, in some ways we are looking for more regulation from FDA, especially on the hemp and CBD side. But again, it will happen. The market is too big. It's making too much noise. There's so many people in it that it's going to have to happen. But it's difficult. I can see as a federal agency, you have so much that you have to consider before you decide what your regulations are going to be, that they've been working on it. So I do expect that we are going to see more regulations within the next year. And I definitely would welcome some of them, including more hemp testing, for example.
I agree with that, Rob. I've spoken on that before with the regulations around the hemp. And just knowing that the hemp plant itself is grown to absorb toxins and heavy metals out of the air and the soil. And the fact that no testing has to be done and it's made in such a concentrated form, that makes me really nervous for the industry, that there is zero regulations around that. There's no pesticide testing or anything done. But this industry is cannabis industry is highly regulated. Everything is tested. They're tested for pesticides, for potency. And the hemp market is, you don't even know where it's coming from at some points. It could be coming from outside of the United States. And I think people need to be very, very cautious if they're purchasing something where that hemp was grown, and understanding what farm was it? Was it local? Was it mixed with something else? So that is something that makes me very nervous of what's happening in the market. It is a wild, wild west when it comes to hemp.
Yes, it is. I guess I want to do one final question before we hit our final remarks, as I feel like that's probably approaching us soon. Does anybody have advice on setting up a business in cannabis without breaking the bank?
I'll start on that one, and I do hope that this will come out of the New Jersey regulations. But one thing I noticed in Oregon when they were setting up their edibles program, it did take a little while, but what would happen is once somebody got a certified kitchen, and of course the kitchen should be zoned properly, they should be clean, they should be regulated, they should go through everything that any other place that makes food does. But once they are approved and that person has a license, what they were able to do is help small operators. And the way they did that is they rented out their kitchen to the small operators during off hours. So if you're a major manufacturer, maybe you work from 9 to 5, and then from 6 to 10, you let a small operator go in there, and then from 11 to 3, and then from 3 to 6. But they're all working in a compliant kitchen. They all still have to get their license, but it's a way that they can do different stuff. So if you're a small cupcake manufacturer, maybe you can make a run at renting somebody's kitchen for 3 hours in the middle of the night to get yourself started. But I saw that in Oregon, and that helped a lot of the small operators. And I'm hoping that New Jersey will do that as well.
Okay, that's interesting.
I would say that if you're just starting out as an entrepreneur, I think it's really, really important to have a solid foundation. I think a lot of people think that you're going to enter this industry and you're going to get rich quick. I think it's important to understand that just to go slow, build a solid foundation, have a good team of people, make sure everybody is trained, have excellent processes in place, and also have a really good product that you're gonna sell. Don't copy, use people as inspirations, but create a product that's unique, that's going to give people a reason to create, basically a buzz around your company. And I think the consumers are the best people to talk to. So if you're going to go out and start hustling your product to the inventory managers and the bud tenders, I really think it's the consumers that you want to create the biggest buzz around. They're the people that are buying your product. They're the people that are going to tell their friends. So going slow, building a strong foundation, don't grow too quickly, I think is just really, really important.
I'll do a quick kind of response to that. I would say, get educated, like really find out. For me, I went to Amsterdam. And then since then, I've done multiple courses, and you start discovering your passion, and that's going to be your fuel that's going to carry you through. So I would say try to drill down on what really is organically something you're passionate about, which kind of segment of cannabis or hemp travel. And then surround yourself around partners that are supportive with aligned values for the long term. So it's an enjoyable ride where people are on the same planet when they're discussing this, right? Whatever that is for you. And then just roll up your sleeves every day and do some work. And cannabis is so wide and inclusive. There's really lanes for everyone because it's still very early from this new era of normalization. So I would challenge people to really educate, find where they're inspired, and then create a business model with milestones and goals year over year, and create a team that you enjoy working with as much as possible.
Awesome. All great advice.
Can I just tack on to Brian, Jenna? Is that okay? Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think that's a really important point. I have a lot of students often ask me about cannabis tourism and about what areas they should get into, what are the trends, where are they? And I always tell them that, well, you have to first start with what you're passionate about. What is it about cannabis? And you don't have to necessarily be a cannabis consumer, by the way, to be involved in cannabis tourism supplying end of things. But that's just so important, is to build on that passion. So I think that's a really important key, Brian. And then just to add on to everyone's comments, because it kind of brings us back around to how we started the discussion. We were mentioning about how it's the municipalities that are having to be dealt with. So it's a small scale with respect to regulations, especially when it comes to consumption. So in addition to having partners with other businesses that share those values that you have, it's so important to build relationships with your local government. Send them an email, say, hello, this is what I would like to do. Be transparent, build that relationship. And I know that in Calgary, Alberta, which is a city in a province in Canada, I know that the tourism industry is beginning to work with the municipalities in actually writing the regulations. And so, well, how would they even know that they needed the regulations in the first place? Because seemingly this is a very missing part of our regulations in Canada. Well, because the tourism industry was stepping up, right? And so this kind of speaks to what Rob was saying too, that relates to, I think there was a question about the FDA. In Canada, it's Health Canada that is setting those standards. And so it's a matter of the industry approaching the regulatory body on a large scale and say, look, hey, you're missing these things, because there is an unawareness. I think stigma is part of it, but yeah, just striking up those local relationships with people at your municipal level, inviting them to come on a tour, right? Invite them to come to your restaurant, right? Even if they say no, it doesn't matter, right? Stay in touch, right? You want to set that standard for showing that you're a socially responsible participant in the industry.
Awesome. Amazing. I love that. That was a great way to, close us out a little bit of talking about, getting in touch with your government officials, always important.
Wow, thank you all. This was a really insightful discussion. Thank you for sharing your ideas and your insight. As New Jersey is just in the beginning stages of launching legalized recreational cannabis, it's so important for our local hospitality and tourism leaders and entrepreneurs and local officials to hear the experiences from other states. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. Special thank you to Jenna, our moderator, and also to our partners for helping us to produce this event. Please, for our audience here, if you would take the time to fill out the exit survey, we'd really appreciate the input. And a recording of this session will be available on the Light website by the end of the week. So thank you, everyone. I hope all of you enjoyed the panel that attended, and see you for our next one.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
This event is presented by the Lloyd D. Levenson Institute of Gaming, Hospitality and Tourism, Stockton University's School of Business, in partnership with the Greater Atlantic City Chamber of Commerce and the Cannabis and Hemp Research Initiative at Stockton.